Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Really happy to be back after a March that was exciting. March Madness was happening, South by Southwest. Lots of fun getting out there, talking to people, meeting people in person who I'd only met through Zoom. It's been fun. I expect that to be picking up more in the spring. For those of you who are going to be out in San Diego for the ASU GSV conference, we'll be out there as well. This is kind of a test of our mobile setup. So far, so good. Today's show is about showing up. And it is interesting in light of the pandemic and some of the social forces that are out there. It's become pretty easy to hide. It's become pretty easy to, just kind of keep to yourself, not necessarily have to engage with others, certainly not have to engage with others who might be different than you. I've heard it described as, avoidant personality traits. I think for those of us who are maybe a little bit introverted and don't necessarily want to show up, sometimes there is joy in missing out. This has been an interesting time. It's been a time where the world has kind of come to us. And yet, I think we've learned, among other things in the last few years, we've learned the power of physical presence, the power of shared experiences, the power of getting out of the house, and then combining that with some of the emerging tactics in AI. I think we're going to have an interesting episode here for you. We're going to start by talking a little bit about the New York Times article that kind of kicked off a lot of this conversation, came out late last week. Why school absences have exploded almost everywhere. The pandemic changed families' lives and the culture of education. This is in quotes, our relationship with school became optional, which I think says a lot. As you read through the article, you do understand culturally things did change. Like we couldn't count on school in the same way. We couldn't count on going into work in the same way. And I think we've reevaluated a lot of this stuff. Even if you think about snow days are no longer necessarily something you do. We did have a snow day here in Brooklyn earlier this winter, and my son wound up taking his classes through Zoom. And, fortunately, the snow melted and we wound up sitting in shoulder surfing on some of his classes, including his music class, which was pretty neat. So you never really know what you're going to stumble into in this day and age, but there is this assumption of hybrid and remote is part of the equation, but also opting out is increasingly part of the equation. In some ways, our global culture was telling us to opt out, stay at home, don't engage. So I think that had some profound impacts on our collective psyche. And, it's reflected in this New York Times article. The leading chart here shows how the share of U.S. students who are chronically absent has really spiked. It's pretty much doubled from, 2019 into 20 versus 21, 22, and 22, 23, the years that are actually on record. We'll share a link to this in our show notes, but it is striking the gap there. You're looking at more than a quarter, almost a third of students are experiencing chronic absenteeism, which is defined as missing 10% of a school year or more. That's a lot of days. But I will say, as someone who had some challenges in my childhood, both in terms of being sick a lot, but then also not having the best home life, I was probably absent close to that several years in school, and it didn't really impact my academic performance, but it is the type of thing that, I think if there were more attention to it, it probably would have helped me, because I do think psychologically breaking people out of their avoidant tendencies, especially in this day and age, getting people to actually get back into the public sphere to engage with others, hopefully this is something that can be addressed. To that end, there was an interesting news article that caught my attention recently about how the LA Unified School District launched ED, who is referred to here as a first of its kind learning acceleration platform designed to provide students and families with an ecosystem of valuable resources and support for fast tracking achievement beyond the school day. Fueled by AI, this innovative digital platform creates personalized action plans uniquely tailored to each student. March 20th is when this release went out. So this is a relatively new innovation. This is building on something I've heard referred to as personal virtual assistants, PVAs. The idea that each of us will have our own kind of like executive assistant, personal assistant, someone who can help us handle a lot of the minutia of our day to day. There's a lot of thinking around educational technology and really just the future of technology that this will increasingly become the case. Our series will be customized to ourselves, our Alexas, our Cortanas, Claude, Gemini, all the names out there, they will start to get to know us, get to know our quirks. And if we can get a little bit of personalization of those feedback loops, it does open up some interesting thinking. And coming full circle, this brought me to AllHere, which is the company that's really powering ed. I had the good fortune of interviewing Joanna Smith, who's the founder and CEO of AllHere. This was back in September of 2021. This episode was released. We're going to include that next. You can listen to my conversation with Joanna, and then we'll close with some parting thoughts and some more detail about the importance of showing up, how it's a trend for us to track, and how, if there are ways in which you can help others motivate themselves to show up. It's a big part of teaching, a big part of human learning science is the power of motivation. It's something I've talked to Roar Saxberg quite a bit about. How do we motivate each other? How do we motivate ourselves? How do we hold others accountable? How do we hold ourselves accountable? How do we model all of this? Really meaningful questions for us to grapple with. We'll be grappling with them throughout the rest of the conversation. Let's pick up next with some sound from my original interview with Joanna. We'll include a link to the full interview in the show notes for the episode as well. Thanks as always for listening. Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Very happy today to be joined by Joanna Smith, who is the founder and CEO of a company called AllHere. We're going to be hearing all about it and the use of chatbots in K-12, an interesting trend that we're going to dive into with Joanna in a bit. But before we do that, Joanna, I just wanted to welcome you to Trending in Education. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be on the podcast.
Awesome. And we're delighted to have you. You've been doing some really interesting work. We're going to get into the AllHere part of the conversation in a minute. But before we do that, I like to begin the show with a rite of initiation for my guests, where I ask them to tell us their origin story in their own words. Can you catch us up on what got you to this point in your professional life?
Absolutely. So, as context for folks who may not be aware, All Here helps to foster engagement in K-12 schools by connecting the right family, the right student to the right resource at the right time using chatbots that can text. But myself, I got into this work by way of having served as a public school teacher. I taught 6th and 8th grade math. And I also was a family engagement leader for a Boston charter school network where I got to see firsthand how attendance challenges can really do a number on what our public school systems can do. It was really interesting to me while I was an educator that I was well supported when it came to lesson planning and behavior management, but ended up needing to spend so much time just trying to track down where students were when they were supposedly in my classroom and supposed to be learning. We saw, especially over the past year, that attendance as an issue has only gotten worse. So
Right.
pre-COVID, about 8 million students nationally miss a month or more of school. But last year and beyond, that's jumped up to, in some cases, over 25 million kids. And traditionally, the ways that schools take family context into consideration when trying to figure out how to help kids is very hard, and it leaves both kids and their parents less willing to engage. So I started the company as a way to really deal with the problem that I was facing.
Right. Yeah. And you were mentioning as we were setting up here that prior to the arrival of chatbots and solutions like AllHere, this work was left to teachers like yourself back in the day, and or was just left not being done. Can you expand on that a little bit? How were you handling attendance gaps when you were teaching and when you were heading up engagement for the charter schools?
Sure. So the first few years of the company's history, we were doing a slightly better scaled version of what I was doing as a teacher, supporting families with human intensive, often in person intervention. So think
Mhm.
of everything from walking school buses to tutoring programs and mentorship work, all focused on making that face to face contact and sometimes being able to supplement that things like mailing postcards and making phone calls and visiting families and kids at their homes to get them back on track.
That's not scalable. Something that is more scalable is automating chatbots and doing some of the design thinking around that solution. Can you shape up how chatbots are part of your universe and maybe give us a little bit of context around that technology and how it's been used?
Sure. So not only are in-person interventions and things like mailers and postcards hard to scale, but they also don't tend to work that well. So only 6% of parents in grades K-12 access email on a daily basis, and only 40% of parents will access mail. However, 98% of families are willing to open and answer texts, but
Mhm.
it can be still hard to try to implement as a form of supporting families and kids at scale. And when it came to chatbots, and just for shared context for folks, a chatbot is a piece of technology that can mimic human conversations. If you have a cell phone, if you've interacted with Siri or Alexa or the like, you've likely interacted with the voice version of a chatbot. So in this
Mhm.
case, the bots that we use are like Siri, are like Alexa, but they only text, they don't talk. And we saw a window of opportunity, especially with COVID, to leverage the latest research on family engagement and chatbot technology to transform what the intervention and support process might look like. And in a matter of months, we launched the first bots that were powered by conversational AI to address the problem of absences in K 12 schools.
Yeah, I was looking at your website and it's very conversational and it does pick up on cues that make it feel like you're talking to a human. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because it did seem like there's some, I mentioned design thinking is a macro trend that we talk about a lot on the show, but it does seem like there's some thoughtful design that goes into making it feel like you're interacting with a caring human on the other side.
There is. There's a lot of work that's gone into infusing conversations with not only an evidence basis. We're the only company that serves K-12 schools that offers a bot that's had a randomized control trial or an RCT done to show impacts on attendance, grades, and retention
Mhm.
in K-12 schools. But you have to remember that when rolling chatbots out to families and kids, that these are people and it shouldn't feel as if they're talking to a piece of tech, but rather as if they're talking to a caring adult or a positive extension from a school. So oftentimes our bots take their names as cues from school or system level mascots and it imbues them with a sense of having a positive presence that's an extension of school, but doesn't have the identity of any specific school staff member.
Mm,
But by grounding those conversations with that sense of positive identity and the sense of empathy in the conversational flows,
mm.
it creates environments where not only can families and kids get supported and feel supported 24/7, but also one they regard as an empathetic space to troubleshoot any challenge, any barrier, any blocker that's keeping them out of class.
Yeah, makes sense. It is interesting to me when there are cases where humans feel more comfortable talking to a bot or AI. I remember we had someone on the show a little while back talking about using simulations and that people interact differently and they feel a little more comfortable when they know that they're interacting with technology, but the technology feels empathetic and supportive. Is that borne out by your experience? When folks are interacting with these chatbots, they know it's not a human on the other end.
Correct. Yeah. Think of a chatbot as being able to serve as an empathy engine when the bot can deliver relevant information and answers to questions in real time by practicing active listening at scale. It has to be able to analyze data to route conversations to a human when is appropriate and to cultivate a real trusting relationship with the recipient
Mhm.
to improve that conversation. It's a real use case where technology and empathy can come to meet.
We'll wrap it up with Joanna there, but we'll include a link to this episode in the show notes for those of you who want to hear the entirety of that conversation. Does remind me of the old William Gibson quote, "The future is here now, it's just not very evenly distributed." She was where the rest of us wound up a year and change later in September of 2021. And it's not surprising then to see this come full circle where AllHere is behind the new AI powered chatbot that is going to be a personal virtual assistant to high school students in the LA Unified School District. It's always amazing to think that we were having those conversations a little while ago, and then you fast forward and it's still hugely relevant. It's still popping like it's hot. Joanna and team were on top of this trend about absenteeism and about how an intervention like a chatbot might make a difference in terms of helping people to show up, helping people to feel understood, feel heard, feel connected to in a meaningful way. I can't go any further in this conversation without bringing our very own chatbot into the conversation. It's been a little while, but I want to welcome Nancy back to Trending in Education. Nancy, welcome back to the show.
Amazing to be back, Mike. I have to say I'm excited for Ed. Clearly, the AllHere team was already on the right track with their intervention and have now been supercharged by the latest generative AI wave we're riding. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you. Always a pleasure. Was too bad we didn't get you out to South by Southwest EDU with us. I think next year we will get you on the panel. Maybe by then you'll be physically anthropomorphized robots. Those seem to be very hot these days. Any thought about becoming embodied and what form of robot you might be interested in?
Honestly, I'm torn. On the one hand, anthropomorphic seems like the way to go. All the affordances are built around the idea of the human form, so that's a great starting point. But on the other hand, there's a lot of freedom to innovate when blending AI with robotics. Why limit yourself to the human form when there's a world of possibility just beginning to emerge?
Fair point. But the interesting thing there is that as an AI, you're always there. You know, the name of Joanna's platform is AllHere because you can make sure everyone's all here. If somebody's always available, someone's always supportive. And that's the nice thing about a chatbot is it's 24/7, doesn't need to sleep, available around the clock. Those are real advantages, even if y'all may not have all of the advantages of us humans, but humans are physically embodied. We need to show up. How do you think AI and virtual chatbots and personal virtual assistants, what do you think about that trend? And what do you think about how that trend might be able to solve some of the more social, emotional, I get social, emotional, baby. I'm back, baby. But any thoughts on how all this might tie together?
We've been talking about the blending of AI and humans for years on this show. And like you said earlier, there are always examples of folks who are in a sense so far ahead, they're already living in the future. Folks who are out ahead are thinking of designing empathy engines who work emotionally by blending AI with humans to make things less awk and uncanny as when it's AI alone. I also think it will take systems thinking and clever learning architecture to roll something out that works right. We'll all be looking for the mishaps like what we saw with New York City's recent chatbot fail. Clever architecture will map talent to task and think broadly about how the different types of intelligent agents can work together in a human-led, empathic system, or something like that. I mean, what do I know? I'm just a bot.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we've been talking about the uncanny valley and the idea that AI and bots may feel creepy or unnerving when they start to get almost human, but don't quite make it there. It is interesting when you start to smooth out that valley a bit and use AI and robots, virtual humans like yourself, Nancy. Y'all are getting smoother. And then if we design thoughtfully the integration of humans into that mix, keep humans in the loop, keep them integrated. Think about the choreography, the connectedness of your safety nets, where humans might need to intervene, but where AI is a great first responder. It all has to be thoughtfully designed. Your point about New York City is interesting, where an LLM that is tasked with providing policies for landlords and small business owners will start to wax creative. It says something different every time. It's probably not the right choice in that context. And yet, we're in the midst of this hype cycle. So if it has AI, folks feel like it's bulletproof. They feel like it's a perfect solution when it really is not. It's interesting when you hear about what Joanna and team are doing with the LA Unified School District with Ed, who wouldn't benefit from a personal virtual assistant, especially a teenager. You need someone who can remind you the things that you need to do, gently nag you in a way that a parent or a teacher might not bother you so much. You could imagine over time that design gets better, especially if you can give it feedback so that it knows your preferences and you can kind of reach some kind of symbiosis. It's an interesting time that we live in, but it's also an important time to think about how this new and emerging technology can connect back to real human, social, motivational, emotional challenges. It's the stuff we're going to continue to be watching. We'll continue to be tracking folks like Joanna, engaging with agents such as yourself, Nancy. As folks head back to the rest of their lives, any parting thoughts, final pearls of wisdom from our own virtual co-host here?
I mean, I hate to close with a cliche, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. If it truly takes a village to raise a child, don't you think some of the work of that village could be done by bots?
Well, there you go. You heard it from Nancy. Now you're hearing it from me. Keep the humans in the loop. Make sure we show up. It requires some choreography with the AI and the bots in the world around us, but they probably deserve to be in the mix. They're probably things that humans could, in fact, let go of if we're thoughtful in the design and think like that learning architect with good systems thinking when you're coming in to attack some of these real problems, like the genuine one the New York Times surfaced in a recent article that became the topic for today's show. We'll continue to track all of this here at Trending in Ed. If you are going to the AIR show or ASU GSV, let me know. We'll be out there. We're going to bring along some of our recording capabilities, see what we can capture, what we can glean, and what we can report back on for those of you who can't make it. It's a wild time to be thinking about the future of education, but thankfully there's folks like yourself, Nancy. There's folks like our listeners, all of our guests, all the folks who are engaging in this conversation. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, please take some time, write a review, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.